Hi everyone, welcome to another video. My name is Laurent Macquart and you're on the channel Reading with Macquart. Yes, I'm going to keep saying my name every time because my name is hard to pronounce, so get used to it. I'm also going to write it down because Macquart, it's in the title of the channel, but Laurent, well, people are going to mess that up as well because that's what I'm used to, but it's okay. Anywho, welcome to another video. Today I'm going to talk about the books that I read in April that stood out to me. Again, just as last month, I read a lot in April, but I chose 4 books to talk about, and I'm going to do one separate video about Emma by Jane Austen because I have a lot of opinions on that one. So look out for that, and at the end of the video I'm going to do a couple of honorable mentions, so books that I did appreciate but I'm not going to talk about unless you say, hey, please do a video about that, then I will be happy to oblige. Now, the first book that I want to talk about is The Lost Man by Jane Harper. This is not a book I usually read, it's a mystery, but as from the Book Castle and Rincey from Rincey Reads were both raving about this book, so I decided to listen to it on the audio thing that I listen audiobooks on, and I was really happy that I did. It's set in the Australian outback, and at the beginning we meet 2 brothers who are called Nathan and Bud, and the story is told from the point of view of Nathan. And Nathan and Bud meet at the intersection between their lands. They're both cattle ranchers, I suppose we could say, because their brother has been found dead at the stockman's grave. This book is so well constructed. It starts rather slowly. You've got the whole discovery of the body, and slowly but surely the pace starts quickening and quickening and quickening, and at the end, it's just a full-blown train that's just. We get to hear about the history of the characters. We get to hear about what it's like to live in the outback. In such a strange world, you have to ride for 3 hours before you're at the farm of the person that is closest to you. I have trouble wrapping my head around that because in Holland, I mean, if you go from the southernmost part of Holland to the northernmost, it might take you, 3.5 hours? So them doing these kinds of trips and having such huge amounts of land is crazy to me. What was interesting also to see is what effects that had on the community, because they're at the same time very isolated in themselves. I mean, they can not see anybody for a month, but at the same time the community is kind of close-knit, and that has consequences when someone is set outside of the community, which is what happens. And that was fascinating. The book is more than a mystery. It also touches on a topic that I'm gonna say was in the news a few years ago, and it has a good take on it. Now, technically, it's the 3rd part of the trilogy, but you don't need to read the other 2 to really enjoy this one. I mean, I haven't read the other 2, but this one blew me away, especially because of the pace and the build-up, and the story, and the characters. So yeah, so I'm thinking of picking up the other 2. Now, second, we have Les Trois Mousquetaires. I have 2 copies of this because a few years ago I was on holiday with my boyfriend in France, and we were in a secondhand bookshop, and I had already seen this and picked it up and decided I wanted to read this, and he saw this one, which is the abridged version. You can see there is a tiny difference between the 2, and he decided he was going to pick it up as well because he's been learning French, and we thought it would be fun if, when he had reached the last chapter, because he's not a big reader, I would start the book and then we'd see who'd finished first. Unfortunately, that never happened because the book is actually still written in a complicated French, and when you've just been doing Duolingo for 2 years, this was a little bit too hard. So he never got that far, but I decided to pick it up this month. I was hesitating between which edition to pick up. I mean, on the one hand, I have the normal one, but it's huge, it's 800 pages, and on the other hand, I've got the abridged version. And having recently read The Brothers Karamazov and finding that way too big, I figured, why am I going to force myself to read the chunky thing? And then thinking all the time, oh, this is way too long, I wish there was a modern edit of this, basically, when I actually have the modern edit. on my shelves. So I decided to read this one, and I'm happy that I did. So, I read Les Trois Mousquetaires, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. We meet D'Artagnan, who goes to Paris because he wants to be a musketeer like his father. There he meets, fights, and eventually becomes friends with Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, who are three musketeers. Now, the four of them have adventures. They save the French kingdom, they've saved the relationship between the king and queen, they go to war, they've got their personal stories, we meet My Lady de Winter, and it was very entertaining to read about their adventures. Now, Alexandre Dumas, when he wrote this, he wrote it in sections, and every so often one story was published in a newspaper, so it's very episodical, and that's also what you notice when you read this book. It's got short little arcs all the time, and the overall arc is not that present. It reads very eclectically. Their adventures, because they're not always linked, they feel really weird. And well, they are weird because they, for no reason, start fighting with people just because, well, they bumped into them in the street and didn't like the way their hat was on their face, basically. And then the next second, they become best friends with that person. This is literally what happens to D'Artagnan and the three of them. But it's an entertaining bunch of weirdos, and it's happy, and they're drunk all the time, and I have no idea how they're surviving gunfights and sword fights if they're drunk, but hey, whatever. Now, because of the unnatural rhythm, it was sometimes a bit hard to read, but in the end, I'm happy that I read this big classic, and overall really happy that I read the abridged version. Next, I read, also on audio, just like The Lost Man, I read The Bananengeneratie by Pete Wu, which translates to The Banana Generation. This was a book that I listened to in Dutch, and it's a non-fiction about Chinese Dutch men and women who call themselves bananas because they are yellow on the outside but white on the inside, meaning that they look like Asians, but on the inside they're Dutch, they're white. Now, Pete Wu is himself, his parents are from China, and they emigrated to the Netherlands, and he talks in the book about what that meant for him, what his relationship with his parents are, how his upbringing was different than other people. So he was, just like many other Chinese Dutch men and women, working often in the restaurant of his parents and working hard because it's a restaurant, but at the same time seeing his friends having totally different lives and not having these strict parents that want the best for you but that show it in a different way. And Pete Wu goes also to meet other bananas in the Netherlands because he wants to see what he has in common with them and what the differences are. He also talks about what it was like for him to come out as homosexual to his parents and what that was like. He talks about overall the representations of Asians in the media and how one-sided that is. Well, two-sided actually. You've either got the hot Chinese woman or the hot Asian woman, I should say, or the nerdy Asian man or the kung fu fighting Asian man. And he describes what the impact of that is, that because you can't become what you don't see. So at one point he meets a man who is an environmental politician, and even him is like, oh yeah, those exist as well. What I really liked about the book is that often when I read a book that talks about this race issue, it is mostly about African Americans living in the US, and sometimes but that's the next book about being black in the UK. And it was really interesting to read first about what it's like in the country that you live in, and second to read about the race that we don't often hear about when it comes to all of these racism issues. In the end, I appreciated this book for what it did. It made me think a bit more and be more aware of what other people are going through. Last, we've got, at least of the books I'm going to talk about Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. For the people who don't know, this is one of the two books that won the Booker Prize last year. I'm not going to talk about what happened there, also because I haven't read the other books, so I can't judge. In this book, Bernardine Evaristo shows us the lives of 12 mostly black women in the UK with different ages, different sexualities. Actually, they're not all women. One is a non-binary character, should have said that. And all of these stories are grouped in groups of 3, so you've always got the woman, the daughter, and the other, which can be anything up to a colleague, a friend, or a granddaughter, or something like that. And all of the stories are as well interlinked. There's a lot of hype around this book, a lot of people like it, and I have joined the wagon. It is wonderfully written. These characters are so well made. It didn't feel like they were characters, it felt like people she had met and had talked to, and therefore had got to learn what their history was like. So I really loved that. The way it's written, I should say, she sorry, don't know what left, right, and left is like, but she writes every sentence. She doesn't use dots. She doesn't really use punctuation. So every sentence she goes to the next paragraph. And it took me a while to get used to that because I'm not used to that kind of rhythm. But once I was used to it, it made reading it so natural. I mean, when we talk, we don't really have paragraphs when we talk, I think. I don't know. It made it very, once you had started reading, you would just continue reading because you were on that river, basically. Now the only negative, well, maybe I have 2 negatives. The only negative that I had, so it's not the only negative. Come on. One of the negatives that I have is that I wanted it to be longer. These characters were so human that I wanted to learn more about them because basically we get to know about their life, but they're not. I just would have loved this to have a plot, kind of, to see them in action, basically, to see more of them, because I think basically because I love them so much and they were very interesting. Now the second thing is I'm a person that really enjoys a plot and I enjoy worlds and learning about cultures and stuff like that. And this was not that. I mean, we read these characters and we see their lives, but I don't know if I'm going to remember it. I don't know if I absolutely loved it, but I don't know if in 2 years' time I'm gonna remember saying, oh yeah, I've read that, it was good. But what was it that I loved? I don't know if I'm gonna remember that. I'm curious to see, but wonderfully written, absolutely recommend it. It was a great read. Those were all of the books I wanted to talk about for a longer time. Now, as I said, I read a lot more books in April because I have a lot of time to do that, and I wanted to mention a few others. These are Circe. Ooh, should hold it the right way around. This is going very well. Wait, gonna do this correctly. Circe by Madeline Miller. Children of Virtue and Vengeance, second book of the trilogy by Tomi Adeyemi. I really love this world. By the way, Circe is about Circe, the Greek goddess. Then we've got Childfinder by Rene Denfield, which was also a mystery, by the way. I read 2 mysteries this month. This was also very good. Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. This was a book club pick. Really appreciated it as well. And I also read Pidgeon English by Stephen Kelman, which if someone read, I mean, I really need to talk to someone about that book, but it's not well known at all, and it's weird, and I mean, I didn't necessarily appreciate it, but if you have. And I also read The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera. I read it in Dutch, but I really wanted to read it in French. But hey. Now, if you've read any of these books, the ones that I've talked about for a longer period of time, or the others, I would really like to talk about them, especially all of them, basically. So talk to me in the comments, and I will see you in another video. Bye!